The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
All right, so I started the broadcast. Looks like we got 30 attendees. So welcome everybody. My name is Seth Lake. We are doing the Modes and Codes webinar. Thank y'all for attending. I'm going to give a few minutes just to see if anybody else jumps on here. Couple housekeeping items. If you haven't used a webinar before, you should have a control panel that you're seeing. On that control panel, right now you're muted, so you can't ask any questions verbally, but you are welcome to ask questions via your control panel. And there should be a question box, and you can send it privately, or you can send to everybody attending the webinar. I would suggest that you send your questions to everybody, because if somebody has a question, more than likely everybody will. Let me get my sweet webcam going there. So y'all can actually see me. Well, I guess that's not working. Anyway, if you have questions, put your question there. If you wanna, I think you can raise your hand too. There's a little button to do that as well. But I'll be looking down there periodically. I can see when somebody's asked a question, and I'll answer that. The first part of the briefing will be going over kind of some slides, and then it'll be more interactive, where I will be going through some websites and then how to fill out the international flight plan form. All right, looking at our time, it's 6:31. I'll give it a couple more. We had a couple more jump on there. And all right, we'll go ahead and get started. All right, so this is, again, my name is Seth Lake, and in today's webinar, we're going to go over a briefing I put together called Modes and Codes. And what we're going to be talking about today is we're going to do an introduction of the terms and explain those terms. We're going to talk about why we're here. We're going to go over some GPS basics because that's important to what we're talking about with ATSB eventually. We're going to go over WASP, non-WASP, ATSB types. We're going to talk about types of failures. Then we're going to go to the SAPT website. And last but not least, we're going to talk about how to fill out the new international flight plan form and what equipment codes you need to be putting on that form to make sure it's working correctly. All right, so our terms. We have some of these terms you're probably familiar with. Some of them maybe not. We have first ATSB, Automatic Dependent Surveillance. We have the SAPT, that is the Service Availability Prediction Tool. That is a website that we'll go to because it's actually an interactive tool that you can use. There is RAIM, which hopefully somebody or most of y'all have heard about that, but that's something to do with GPS. Just refers to our receiver autonomous integrity monitoring, and it's a way for our GPSs to monitor whether or not they have good enough signal to navigate off of, to put it really simply. And then our technical standard orders, we're going to be talking about different technical standard orders in regards to ATSB equipment as well as GPS equipment. And then two that were actually new to me when I was creating these briefings, and that is the wide area multilateration and secondary surveillance radar. So think of these as kind of next gen tools that will come online when we're actually using ATSB to supplement and eventually replace our radar areas. So areas that were previously non-radar will then basically have radar type separation provided by WAM and SSR. All right, so why are we here? ATSB determines positions a lot differently than radar does, and so the FAA put together the rulemaking committee to advise them on, hey, what do we need to be doing differently when we adopt ATSB? And so the ARC, they got together, they had a lot of meetings, I'm sure, and they came to the conclusion that the FAA really needed to create a system that can monitor ATSB, since it's going to be used eventually to maintain aircraft separation. We need a way to monitor that whole system and figure out when it's giving us good information and when it's not. So that's why we're here, essentially. All right, back to the fundamentals of GPS certification. We're going to talk in TSO. Now, I know this may sound a little wonky, but most pilots talk about WAS or non-WAS. Really, that's an easy way of saying if it's TSO 129 or 196 versus TSO 145, 146. So if your GPS is certified under TSO 129 or 196, it can't be used as a sole means of navigation. If it's under TSO 145 or 146, it can be. So that's the difference between WAS and non-WAS. And you can find more details about that in two advisory circulars, 90-108 and 90-100 are the two documents you'll find if you want to read up more on those TSO certifications. That's going to be referenced later on in the SAPT website, so you need to know what those terms mean. All right, so WAS versus non-WAS. What is WAS? This is WAS right here. These are our 3 WAS satellites. It's a wide area augmentation system. It's a satellite-based augmentation system. WAS is kind of the American term for that. So it's you know, the Kleenex of tissue paper. WAS is kind of a proprietary name, versus satellite-based augmentation system is what the international community refers to it as. So if you go to Europe, you're not going to be dealing with WASP, but another satellite-based augmentation system. But for the US, we have the Galaxy 15, the ANIC F1R, and the SatMex-9. Those are our 3 geosynchronous satellites that give us the WAS signal. So if you have WAS in your airplane, it's getting a signal from one of these 3 satellites. Not that that's super important to you as a pilot, but I thought it added some good background and just interesting to know how the system's actually working. And now your types of ATSB, you have 2 types of ATSB receivers. You have the 1090 extended squitter, the 1090 ES. This is the same waveform as the old MODES transponders were. So it's the same type of signal, all that. It's the same. And it is required if you're flying above flight level 180 or if you're flying internationally. I think the international community went with 1090 ES because it was a little more ubiquitous. Since it was already used for MODES, it wasn't as big of a muscle movement as an entirely new waveform, which was done with the UAT. UAT is the Universal Access Transceiver, and it's a entirely new type of signal protocol on 978 megahertz, and it is actually a bigger bandwidth and is how we get the FISB weather NOTAMs and the TSB traffic. So all that fancy stuff that you get with your ATSB receivers, those are coming through the UAT portion of the transceivers. Now back to these. A lot of general aviation transceivers have both of these waveforms built in. So you have 1090 ES as well as UAT. Now, as a pilot, this is important to you because it's going to change what you file in your 1801, in your international flight plan. And you'll have to excuse me if I slip up and say 1801. That's the Department of Defense form number for the international flight plan, and I've got a long Air Force background, so sometimes I slip out a character here and I call it a 1801. It's the International Flight Plan. All right, types of failure. Real quickly, just going over the types of failure for GPS. When GPS first came out, we had to check RAIM, and basically checking RAIM just meant, hey, this Receiver Autonomous Integrity Monitoring is what RAIM stands for, and it knows when the satellites are going to fail or go beyond the horizon where we can't use it for navigation. And if enough of those go out or aren't usable, because sometimes they're down for maintenance or I guess software updates, whatnot, we need to know that as a pilot and know that we can't count on using that satellite for navigation. So we would always check our RAIN before we go out and fly, and if we would only shoot a GPS approach if we had enough RAIN to do so. A newer form of failure detection is the fault detection and exclusion, or FDE, and that automatically detects a RAIN outage, and it excludes that satellite, so you're not getting bad data from that. The newer GPS units, most all of them have the FDE or some form of FDE, and that's why you might not get that pounded into your head from your instructor like I did when I was first learning GPS. You don't have to check RAIN anymore because we have this thing called FDE. So it's the newer and better version to check for GPS failures. Both of those are minimized if we have baro aiding. And baro aiding is something that's going to come up in the SAPT tutorial that I do later. Most importantly, if I'm assuming that a lot of my audience is general aviation pilots, most general aviation aircraft, at least the small piston variety, aren't going to have baro aiding. But if you do, and that's in your the STC for whatever GPS you have installed, then that's something that you need to know because it's going to affect how FDE and RAIN work. All right, so from here, we're actually going to go to the SAPT website. And I'm going to check here. Yep, y'all are seeing the correct website. All right, the best way to find this is to Google SAPT. So SAPT FAA. Google that, and this will be the first site that comes up, and you're going to go to the SAPT home. So at the SAPT home, we're going to go to the flight plan form. And very ironic that this flight plan form is the old FAA flight plan form, the one that we're no longer using. Really, I think they slipped up in designing this. They should have just made it look like a basic web form and not like a flight plan form, because I think this might cause some confusion. So anyway, it is what it is. All it is a way to get information about what type of aircraft you're flying with what type of equipment, the point you're leaving from, the point you're going to, the time you're en route, and then it's going to give us an interactive map on if we're going to have any ATSB outages along our route of flight. So I'm going to put in a tail number here and a speed, and I'm going to leave from my my home airport here. I'm going to put in a Zulu time of 23:55. We're going to cruise at 8,000 feet. I'm going to cruise down to Texarkana via the Hot Springs VOR. So all I've done here is put in a really basic flight plan. That's all that you need, nothing else. And just to be clear, this is not filing a flight plan. All right, this is just an image that they used. I don't know why. I don't know if they thought it would be cute or helpful, but all it is confusing. You're not filing a flight plan here. All you're doing is you're giving the system your information so it can tell you if you're going to experience any outages. So right here, you're going to choose a type of GPS. So remember, we talked about TSO 129 versus 146 versus 196. So we're going to say we have a TSO 129, and we have 282 or 260 Bravo. So what is that? That is, if you look on your control panel, there should be a couple of handouts that you can access, but I'll just pull it up real quick. There is a FAA ICAO flight plan quick guide dated 2019. We're going to use this at the next when we're done using the SAPT tool, this is what we're going to use to figure out how to fill out an 18 or the International Flight Plan form. Right here, the 260 Bravo and 282 Bravo are referring to either the 1090 extended squitter GPS or ATSB unit or the UAT ATSB. So since I'm speaking to the general aviation audience, I'm going to, a lot of your general aviation, if you're operating below flight level 180 in GA piston, good chance that you have 282 Bravo is your ATSB. Mask angle, we're not going to worry about it. We're just going to leave it at 5. And remember, baro aiding isn't something that's typically equipped on general aviation, so we're going to leave that unchecked. And we're going to click the button of check availability. So it gives us this graph here and says no outages predicted along the route. So that's good. We're going to view that in an interactive map. Now, if you're on your home computer and following along, this is this interactive map is kind of data hungry, so you need a pretty good internet connection for it to work, and some patience. So you can see it's taking a while to load here on the webinar. If you have used any other interactive maps, it's pretty intuitive on how to use it. I've just zoomed in. So what we're seeing here, a few different things. You can actually see the Arctic. These are, this is Memphis Center we're seeing here. This orange line where we originate from Russellville. We can see our flight plan where we're going from Russellville to Hot Springs. And we also have these big orange circles. Those orange circles are actually areas where there's planned GPS interference tests. So if you look on the bottom of my screen, there's a checkbox right now that says show GPS interference tests. I can uncheck that and it'll take those areas away. And there you see that the map is clean now. So this is actually one of the more useful things about this tool is you can pull it up and see where there's planned GPS interference testing going on. So I've always, I'm sure you've seen the NOTAMs as well, and the center NOTAMs of these huge areas of GPS interference testing. This is a nice graphical depiction of where those are located. So we have our route of flight there, and we have down here is a slider tool, and we can just slide. As we slide the little ball across, we're basically checking our whole route of flight for any outages. Now, if we did have outages, it would show up as yellow or red. So I'm going to go back and actually show you an example of what that would look like. But luckily for our example that we just ran, there's no planned outages or expected outages. So what does an outage look like? Well, to do that, I'm going to go back to the SAPT home website. So here we are. This is the same landing page we landed to, and we're going to look at an outage summary. It's right below the flight plan form. And we're going to look at the first one, which is TSOC 129, no baro aiding, the mask angle of 5. And we're going to click to view what the outages look like. It's going to open up that interactive map for us again. And now we're going to get to see what an outage looks like. So if you're flying around with a TSO 129 GPS, this is what you would look at if you were wondering if you're going to have ATSB coverage for the duration of your flight. All right, so I'm using my mouse to slide this along, and there's a little bit of lag in the video, so I'm just going to take it to where I know there's an outage and pause it there. All right, so you can see right there in a large portion of the central U.S. from like the eastern seaboard all the way over to just almost Nebraska, it looks like. There's a big red blob, and so what that is indicating is I may not have ATSB coverage in that area, because in order for ATSB to work properly, right, it has to know our exact position, and with that, the TSO 129, since it doesn't have WASP and all the rain monitoring and FDE, doesn't know our exact position, so ATSB isn't going to work as well as it should. Now, this is important, and it illustrates the fact of why we have to check ATSB coverage. If we're ever going to move on and implement ATSB into next gen and use it for IFR separation, we have to have really good information to make sure that airplanes aren't going to get too close to one another if we're using this in lieu of using our current radar system. So that's what a GPS outage looks like. So I can see here on my timestamp that that's just after 3 Zulu time on the 30th. So that's in about that's about 3 hours from now. So 3 hours from now, if you're in any of those areas, you're probably not going to have good ATSB coverage. Now, I'll slide it over about 40 minutes later, not even 40 minutes later, and that's what it looks like. So even if you're trying to, if you're trying to get ATSB coverage, and you don't have the WASP GPS, you're going to have good, ATSB in information. You'll have that, not even 30 minutes after that initial outage. So that's the basics of the SAPT website. I've included in the handout section, and you can ask the question on the chat if you're not seeing it, but on your control panel of the webinar, you should be able to see the handouts, and there's 2 handouts. One's the SAPT user guide version 4.1, and the other is the FPL brochure change 6 2018 May 02. That's the name of it. That's what we're going to start using right now, in fact. But you should have both of those handouts. So if you don't have access to those handouts, go ahead and shoot me a message, and we'll try to figure out what's going on. But for now, we're going to go ahead and proceed on with the International Flight Plan equipment codes. So we just we just went over the SAPT tool, all the different times of GPS and ATSB equipment that are out there, and that really is why the FAA was forced to move over to the ICAO flight plan, and that's because the FAA flight plan just didn't have enough equipment code space to work anymore, because a slant Golf doesn't really paint the whole picture, right? You're a slant Golf, well, okay, great. What type of GPS do you have? Are you ATSB compliant? How much ATSB can you do? What about RMP and RNAV? And you got at least 7 different types of RMP airspace that you may or may not be capable of. So we had to go to the International Flight Plan. So what I've done here is just given a basic example of if you have, let's say, a Garmin 430 WASP, your ICAO equipment code is going to be SBDGR, and that will dive into where that goes and what all that means. But here's kind of the breakdown: is S for 18 on the International Flight Plan. S stands for the standard communication, so that's going to be your ILS, your VOR, VHF. So you don't have to put those individually. You just put S. Then you're going to put B, which stands for LPV capability. You need to make sure that your flight supplement that you get with your GPS says that you are indeed WASP capable before you put that LPV. You put D, since with your LPV GPS, you also have DME. G for IFR approved GPS. Now, if you look on systems like ForeFlight or other flight planning tools that kind of help guide you through this, this is going to be called a Global Navigation Satellite System, GNSS. So don't look for GPS, look for GNSS. And then PBN approved, which is R. So that means your aircraft meets the basic RMP standards. I teach a whole class on what the difference between RMP and RNAV is, but it's kind of complicated. Anyway, you are PBN approved if you have WASP capability. And then you may or may not have to fill out Z, which indicates you've got other information box, which is described in the flight plan brochure. So if everybody has access to this, we're going to start going through this flight plan quick guide. This is what we're going to use to figure out what codes our airplane needs. And you'll have to forgive me, the guide is meant to be a trifold handout, so it's not necessarily in perfect order. I'll be flipping back and forth between the pages. And I've got to leave the audience view up to make sure that my screen lag is keeping up there. Okay, so first we're going to look at field 10A of the International Flight Plan form. So if you have a copy of that, you can pull up and read along, but we're just going to go through the codes here. It'll make sense because the codes are labeled on the International Flight Plan form. But you can see that there's the S I was talking about, the standard. That means you have standard equipment, which is in the notes section, and I'm over on the far left of this pamphlet. Let me see. Yeah, here we go. Make sure y'all can see that spotlight tool. So here are the notes I'm referring to. Just use the highlighter tool. Figured out how to use that. That's great. So standard equipment is VOR, VHF, and ILS. So most IFR certified airplanes, you're going to have an S. So that's where we're getting the S, right there. This next A, the GBAS landing system, that is something that I don't think any general aviation aircraft are going to be equipped with. So don't worry about that one. And then we're going to select LPV. So that's the satellite-based augmentation system. That's what SBAS stands for. And we have LPV. We can select DME. All right, ACARS, that's something for transport category aircraft. I doubt that your airplane has it. If you have ADF, you can select that. G is for GPS still, but in this case, it's international. Remember, GPS is kind of the US version of the Global Navigation Satellite System. So you're going to select GNSS. All right, then we get into the CPDLC FANS A1. Don't care about that. And then up here is L. We're not going to select ILS because we selected standard equipment, which includes ILS. So we don't have to worry about that. Now, ATC SAT voice, doubt your plane has that as well, but if it does, you'd select one of those. O for VOR, we're not going to select that, remember, because that's in standard equipment. And R, so if we select R, this is kind of like a decision tree, we have to fill out field 18, which is PBN. We'll get to that in a second. But since we are going to be performance-based nav, because we're LPV, we're going to circle that. And then other capability, since we are ATSB, we're going to have to select that because we're going to have to put in some other fields in field 18. All right, hopefully everyone's still hanging with me. Trying to push through here. Okay, now we're going to field 10B, which is surveillance. So for our surveillance, which is basically our transponder, right? For surveillance in, if you don't have any capability, I figure most general aviation planes are going to be modes A and C. So you're going to select that. And if you have ATSB, you're going to select some stuff down here in the ATSB column. So let's say U2 is pretty common, and B2. You can select both of these. So we're just going to assume that you have a new, I should have looked up Garmin's stuff or some of the new Lynx transponders, but I think most of them are both 1090 ES and UAT. But regardless, if you have those, you're going to put one of the two, either B2 or U2. Now, you may not have ATSB in, so if you don't have ATSB in, then you would just select U1 instead of U2. Don't worry about the VHF data link mode 4. You don't have that. But what is important is this note right here. So when you're compliant and it lists the FAR in the advisory circular, in surveillance, in field 18 SUR, which we're going to get over to field 18 in a second, you're going to put either 260 Bravo or 282 Bravo to do that, okay? ADSC, that may be a form of ADS that you haven't heard of. That's a transport category thing. So if you do need to fill this out, you're flying an airplane where you've probably received training to tell you to do that. So I'm not going to worry about that. Now we're over to, actually, let's go back to the first page here. Okay. Oh, my highlights went along with when I changed the page. Oops. All right, we'll come back to, well, yeah, let me go ahead and erase these. All right, so your PBN capability, since we said, hey, we are PBN capable, we have to tell it what types of PBN. So what we're going to do is go in and we're going to say, so this is just for a standard, let's say you've got a 430 WASP in your airplane or a new Garmin GTM that's WASP. You are going to be B2, C2, which is RNAV2. You're going to go D2, O2 for RMP1, and S1, RMP approach. Now, remember, most general aviation aircraft don't have baro aiding, so that's the baro VNAV. That's why you're not going to be S2, you're just going to be S1. And then the authorization required approach, I don't know of any general aviation aircraft, piston variety that are going to fall into that category, so you're not going to select that. So you're going to have B2, C2, D2, O2, and S1 on your PBN capabilities. All right, your performance category, most GA airplanes are gonna fall into either an A or C. You're gonna put that in. That shouldn't be too complex. All right, we're gonna erase those, and then back to this page. So now we're over to field 18. Do I have any questions yet? Doesn't look like it.
You do have a question.
Oh, I do?
You do. There is a question regarding, so if an ATSB satellite is down and coverage is down, this is back on the ATSB questions, by the way.
Okay.
So if an ATSB satellite is down and coverage is down, what's the backup for GA pilots? What's the backup plan for a VFR flight into Class D, C, and B airspace when satellites are down?
That's a good question. Where are you seeing the question? Because I have the questions pulled up and I don't see it. Did they maybe ask you directly? Or am I just...
It's in the question box under 654.
Okay, I see it, but
Timers.
it's like a tiny window. I can't make it
Right,
bigger.
you need to pop it out.
Oh.
Most of the questions I've answered, I've not answered that one.
Okay.
I thought it'd be a good discussion question.
All right. Well, if I can figure out how to pop it out. All right, so if the ADS-B satellite was a backup for GA pilots. So right now, I think the short answer, and this is just my understanding of it, I probably have a better understanding than most, but I'm definitely not the end-all be-all expert. That is essentially what we're waiting on to make this a replacement for, a true replacement for radar. But right now there isn't a backup. So for ADS-B, if the satellite's down and you don't have coverage, now I don't even know the sample size that would affect, because right now, in order to be ADS-B compliant, you have to have WASP, and we can go back to the SAPT website and see, but you'll see that the outages that are experienced by WASP receivers are significantly lower than those with non-WASP, to the point where they're almost negligible. And I don't know if the goal is to someday make those non-existent, or to just accept the fact that there'll be a few minutes of outage every once in a while, and that's why we have that tool. And more importantly, that's why I believe all the certificate holders. So if you're a 135 or 121 operation, your dispatch has to check that SAPT tool and ensure that your dispatch flight is going to have ADS-B coverage for the duration. And if it's not, I'm sure there's some maybe waiver they can say, or something they filed with Center saying that they're going to lose ADS-B. I'm not really sure. So that's a really long way of saying I'm not sure.
I'd say what we can do, we can follow up on that, and we can get back with the asker. And we've got your email address, and we'll find that answer and we'll get it to you, sir.
Yeah, but that's a good question. I like questions because I feel like I'm kind of talking to my computer right now. And I still haven't figured out how to pop that out. But I will.
Well, that's all we have for right now, Seth, if you want to keep going.
All right, so we're in field 18 now of the International Flight Plan. So field 18, this is where the PBN list, that's what we just did on the back. So just previously, and this webinar is recorded, and I'll post it up so you can go back and look. But the performance-based navigation is what we just filled out. The S1, O1, all that stuff is under the PBN field. Underneath the surveillance field, that's where we're going to put our 282 Bravo. So I circled both of those. So SUR / you're going to put 282 Bravo in there. Then down here at code, every aircraft actually has a Mode S hexadecimal code, and you're going to have to file that in field 18 with the prefix code / and then it gives that example Alpha 519 Delta 9. So those are the three things that you have to have filled out in field 18. Now I know for a fact that I've flown aircraft that are ATSB and all that, and I didn't file this out, or I didn't fill this 1801 out, and I know the pilot I was flying with didn't fill it out correctly. This is when I was kind of learning this, and nobody said anything. I didn't get an email or a letter from the FAA saying, hey, you filed your international flight plan incorrectly. So I don't know the repercussions if you leave this off, and I also don't know how that's going to change with the 2020 mandate. I'm sure some of it will, but I don't know the other side of this system. I don't know if ATC is seeing this information that I'm putting in field 18, or if it's going into the system and it may cause my ATSB not to work correctly. I don't know, but what I do know is this is how you fill it out correctly, and you need to have these fields in field 18 filled out in order for the, per the international flight plan format requirements. So finally, we've reached a point where we've got all the modes and codes for our plane entered into an international flight plan. What I would suggest you do is, first off, if you use ForeFlight, and I'm sure Garmin Pilot does this too, but ForeFlight is what I'm a huge fan of. ForeFlight makes this really easy, and you only have to do it once. So sit down with an instructor. If you want to reach out to me, we can do it over the phone, but we can set up your aircraft once, and it'll remember your aircraft within that system. So within ForeFlight, it will remember the aircraft, and you won't have to struggle with remembering all those codes again. Once you've done that, what I would recommend is, in ForeFlight, you can print out the international flight plan, the completed form. But if you're doing it manually, complete an international flight plan form, get it done correctly. Again, sit down with an instructor and make sure you've done it correctly, and then save that in your flight equipment. Put it in your headset bag or something. That way, if ForeFlight goes down and or you can't get it to work correctly, and you have to by hand fill out an international flight plan form, you're going to have something to work from, and you're not going to have to look up all these codes again. Which hopefully have illustrated that it's kind of complicated to fill out. Okay, I found the question pop up. Where can the hex code be found flying multiple rental aircraft? So that's a good question. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up, I'm going to ask whoever asked that question, send me if you want, well, I won't do that. I'll just do we're just going to do a Google search. Google knows everything. So if you go to Google and you type in a tail number, FlightAware will even have it. I just go with whatever the first link is. Go down, and right here is the Mode S code. Let me use my highlighter tool. Right there. So if you just Google the tail number, and it'll pull up the registration. There's also the registration search function on the FAA website you can use. But Google works really well, and it just pulls up the code. So it's as easy as that. All right, Wes asked, is the flight plan cross-referenced with your ATSB signal, and how would they know if it was filled out incorrectly? I don't that's another one that I don't know if they are cross-referencing. I'm sure that that's why they're requesting that you put in your MODES code on your 1801, because that is essentially what they would cross-reference with. So when your strip prints out with the center, I don't know if the strip would have it on it. Maybe if there's any ATC folks in the room, they could tell me. But I know the system would know your MODES code, and that would be associated with your flight plan. So if that didn't match, that may cause some sort of system error, and you'd pop up as kind of an unknown aircraft.
We can follow up on that one as well.
Yeah. All right. Any other questions? If you have questions specifically about your GPS, you can reach out to me. You can send a private message over this. You can ask the question here. Oh, got another. That's an answer from Robert. Seems to be pretty. The PAPR website or site, I'm not sure what that is. List your tail number correctly. Non-performing emitter on your beacon. Oh yeah, that's a good point. I should have brought that up. Thanks, Robert. I'm not actually. Honestly, I'm not familiar with how to check up on the non-performing emitter. But yeah, the system is logging that. So if basically what a non-performing emitter is your ATSB has been installed incorrectly, and the ATSB system can detect that. And so I think a lot of the newer installations are actually getting that installed in the airplane. So when your ATSB goes out, you'll get a warning message saying that, hey, you're not ATSBing correctly, for lack of a better term. Okay, had a question from Henry about what would you enter if your WASP GPS is not updated. To my knowledge, the WASP that's a different question. I'm assuming you're referring to your navigational database is out of date. That's a different issue. So technically, if it's out of date, then you're not legal to fly IFR anyway. But I don't think there's a code. So let's say you're flying with a WASP GPS that's out of date, but it's VFR and you don't really care. I'd understand that. I don't think the system needs to know that. So there's no special code you would file if your GPS was out of date. Good question. Okay. Well, it's 17 minutes after 7. I didn't draw that out too bad, I don't think. But as long as there's no more questions, I guess, Heather, what do you want me to do to wrap things up?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you, Seth, for doing this. We really appreciate it. And if you guys have any follow-up questions with it, we ought to be able to get those to you. So once again, thank you, Seth, for doing this. We really appreciate it, and we'll get back with you guys that we said we'd follow up with you. So be looking for an answer pretty soon.
Yeah, and thanks everybody for coming. Thanks for inviting me to do it, Heather. I really appreciate it. And again, if anybody wants to reach out to me specifically, you can reach me at lake.seth@gmail.com. So that's lake.seth@gmail.com. And again, thanks for being here. Well, I hope everyone has a good night. See ya.